The mist clung to the ancient oaks like a shroud, heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten blood. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in silver shards, casting elongated shadows that twisted like accusing fingers across the forest floor. Elara's bare feet sank into the cold mud, each step a silent rebellion against the chains that had bound her wrists only hours before. The air hummed with the distant howls of the pack, warnings or perhaps laments, but she pressed on, her breath ragged, tasting the metallic tang of fear on her tongue. She was the sixth, the soulless one, they called her, the blemish on the Alpha's pristine lineage. Born under a blood moon in the shadowed fringes of the Eldritch Pack's territory, Elara had always felt the void within her, a hollow where the wolf spirit should have stirred. No golden eyes to gleam in the night, no claws to rend the hunt, no bond to the moon's pull. The elders had whispered of curses, of spirits stolen by the old gods, but their judgments were swift and unyielding. Banished at dawn, marked with the silver brand that seared her collarbone like liquid fire, she was cast out to wander the wilds, where the soulless were said to wither and fade into the mist. The pain from the brand throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat, a constant reminder of the ritual. They had gathered in the great clearing, torches flickering against the stone altar, the pack's eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Her father's face, once stern but kind, had been a mask of regret as the high priest intoned the words, "You carry no soul of the pack, you are adrift, a ghost among the living." The silver had bitten deep, its magic meant to sever any lingering ties, but as it cooled against her skin, something stirred, not the wolf she lacked, but a faint warmth like sunlight piercing storm clouds. She had hidden it, biting back the gasp, for to show any spark would only invite worse torments. Now, alone in the whispering woods, the boundary between packlands and the forbidden realms, Elara collapsed against a gnarled root, her tattered cloak sodden with dew. The trees here were older than the packs themselves, their bark etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the gloom, guardians against intruders. Legends spoke of the woods devouring the unworthy, vines coiling like serpents to drag souls into the earth. But Elara felt no such hunger. Instead, a strange pull tugged at her core, drawing her deeper into the shadows. Her hands trembled as she traced the brand's edges, the skin puckered and raw. "Soulless," she murmured to the night, the word tasting like ash. Memories flooded her. Childhood chases through the meadows, where pups shifted and romped, their laughter a symphony she could only watch from afar. Her mother's lullabies, woven with tales of the moon goddess granting gifts to all her children, even the quiet ones. But the pack had no place for quiet. They thrived on strength, on the raw power of fang and claw, and Elara's silence had been deemed weakness. A twig snapped in the underbrush, sharp as a whip crack. She froze, heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird. The howls had grown closer, a chorus that echoed with pursuit. Were they hunters sent to ensure her exile stuck, or scavengers drawn by the scent of vulnerability? She scrambled to her feet, mud caking her legs, and darted toward a cluster of thorned brambles. The branches tore at her arms, drawing thin lines of blood that welled warm and sticky, but she pushed through, emerging into a small glade bathed in ethereal light. There, at the glade's heart, stood a crumbling archway of weathered stone, overgrown with ivy that glowed faintly luminescent. It was a relic of the old times, before the packs divided the lands, a threshold to the neutral grounds where alphas from rival clans met under truce. Elara had heard stories of it as a child, whispered around campfires, a place where fates intertwined, where the soulless might find echoes of their missing spirits. She approached hesitantly, the air thickening with the scent of wild herbs and something sharper, like ozone before a storm. As her fingers brushed the stone, a vision flickered at the edges of her mind. Not a memory, but a sensation. Warmth bloomed in her chest, chasing away the chill, and for a fleeting moment she felt seen, not as a curse, but as a light hidden in shadow. She shook her head, dismissing it as desperation's trick, but the glow lingered on the ivy, mirroring the faint pulse beneath her brand. The howls crescendoed, crashing through the trees like thunder. Elara spun, backing against the arch. Figures emerged from the mist, 3 wolves, massive and sleek, their fur rippling like liquid night. They shifted mid-stride, bones cracking and reforming into humanoid forms, warriors of her former pack, eyes burning with duty and disdain. "Run all you want, Soulless," growled the lead hunter, a scarred brute named Thorn, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. "The Alpha's word is law. You'll not taint the wilds with your emptiness." Elara's pulse thundered in her ears, but she stood her ground, fists clenched. No claws, no fangs, but the fire in her veins, the one they couldn't burn away, flared brighter. "I'm already gone," she spat, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "What more do you want? My bones for your trophy wall?" Thorn laughed, a sound like grinding stones, and advanced, his companions flanking him with predatory grace. The air crackled with tension, the glade's glow dimming as shadows lengthened. Elara's mind raced, fight or flee? The archway hummed behind her, an unspoken invitation, but crossing it meant unknown perils, realms where even packs feared to tread. As Thorn lunged, claws extended, the warmth in her chest surged unbidden. A soft light emanated from her brand, not blinding but insistent, like dawn's first blush. The warriors hesitated, eyes widening in confusion and something akin to awe. "What sorcery?" Thorn snarled, but his words faltered as the light wrapped around Elara like a veil, pulling her toward the arch. In that instant, she glimpsed him, a figure in the distance, beyond the threshold. Tall, commanding, with eyes like molten gold that pierced the night. The Alpha King, they called him in hushed tones, ruler of the United Wilds, a legend who saw through illusions to the soul's core. And in his gaze, she wasn't soulless, she glowed. The light intensified, and the world blurred as she tumbled through the arch, the hunter's roars fading into echoes. The forest swallowed her whole, but for the first time, the darkness felt like a promise, not a prison. The veil of the archway parted like mist before a gale, depositing Elara onto dew-slicked stone that bit into her palms as she sprawled forward. The air shifted, thicker here, laced with the tang of salt-kissed wind and blooming nightshade, a far cry from the whispering wood's earthy decay. She gasped, the world spinning in a haze of emerald shadows and flickering torchlight. Her brand pulsed hot against her skin, a beacon that dimmed as quickly as it had flared, leaving her trembling in the sudden quiet. This was no ordinary glade. Towering spires of blackened granite rose around her, half swallowed by creeping vines that whispered secrets in the breeze. Ruins of an ancient keep sprawled across a cliffside plateau, the sea crashing far below in rhythmic fury, its spray rising like spectral ghosts under the fractured moon. The neutral grounds, whispers of a time when alphas forged pacts amid these stones. Before betrayals carved the wilds into fractured realms. But now it thrummed with an undercurrent of life, patrols' distant footfalls echoing like heartbeats in the stone. Elara pushed herself up, knees scraping against moss that glowed faintly under her touch, as if the earth itself recoiled or welcomed her. Blood from the brambles streaked her arms, mingling with mud in rivulets that cooled against her fevered skin. The hunter's roars had vanished, swallowed by the threshold's magic, but their echo lingered in her mind, a reminder that exile was no shield from pursuit. She scanned the shadows, breath shallow, every nerve alight with the forest's watchful gaze. No howls here, only the wind's mournful sigh through cracked battlements. carrying the faint metallic scent of blood long dried. Footsteps approached, deliberate and unhurried, crunching over fallen leaves that crackled like brittle bones. Elara whirled, heart slamming against her ribs, but the figure that emerged from the gloom was no snarling warrior. He was immense, broad-shouldered, and cloaked in shadows that seemed to bend to his will, his presence filling the air like the press of an impending storm. Eyes like forged gold caught the moonlight, piercing through the darkness to pin her in place. The Alpha King, Kale, they named him in the old tales, the uniter who had forged the wilds from chaos, his rule a blade that cut both friend and foe. He halted a pace away, his gaze tracing her form, not with the disdain of her pack, but with a quiet intensity that stripped her bare. The brand on her collarbone itched under that scrutiny, as if it yearned to ignite once more. "You crossed the threshold," he said, his voice a deep timbre that resonated through the stone like thunder rolling over the waves. No accusation, only curiosity, laced with something warmer, like embers banked against the cold. Elara's throat tightened, words tangling in her chest. She rose slowly, fists clenched at her sides, the mud squelching beneath her feet. "I had no choice," she rasped, tasting salt from unshed tears or the sea's breath. "They branded me soulless, cast me out like refuse." The admission hung between them, raw and exposed, her voice cracking on the edges. In her pack, such vulnerability was death. But here, in this ruined sanctum, it felt like a key turning in a long-locked door. Kyle's expression shifted, a flicker of sorrow crossing his chiseled features, scarred from battles that had etched lines like rivers on his skin. He stepped closer, the air humming with his scent. Pine resin and wild musk mingled with the faint ozone of untamed power. "Soulless," he echoed, the word soft, almost reverent. His hand lifted, hesitating before the air between them, as if sensing the glow she hid. The packs cling to their rituals like chains, blind to the light that defies them. I saw it through the veil. Your spirit isn't absent. It's veiled, a flame in the void. She recoiled, the warmth in her core stirring unbidden at his words, chasing away the chill that had seeped into her bones. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not as a curse, but as a riddle worth unraveling. Memories surged, the elders' chants, the silver's burn, her father's averted eyes. "You don't know me," she whispered, defiance sharpening her tone, though her limbs trembled with exhaustion. "I'm nothing, a hollow shell they feared to break." A low rumble escaped him, not laughter, but a sound like distant waves approving her fire. He gestured to the ruins, where torches sputtered along a winding path leading to a grand hall, half-veiled in ivy. "Come. The night grows teeth here, and you're no ghost to wander it alone." As they moved, his stride matched hers without effort, the ground seeming to steady beneath his boots. The wind tugged at her cloak, carrying whispers from the sea, promises of storms or salvation. She couldn't tell. Deeper into the keep, the air grew heavier, scented with smouldering herbs and the faint, acrid bite of alchemy. Flickering light revealed tapestries frayed by time, depicting wolves entwined with luminous figures, their forms shifting between beast and ethereal glow. Elara's fingers brushed one, the fabric rough and threaded with silver, sending a jolt through her arm. Her brand warmed again, subtly, like sunlight filtering through storm clouds, and she yanked her hand back, pulse racing. Kyle watched her, his golden eyes unblinking. "This place holds echoes of the old magic," he murmured, pausing at an arched doorway where moonlight pooled like spilled mercury. Before the packs divided, the moon goddess wove souls with threads of light and shadow. Some were born to the wild fury, others to the quiet blaze. Yours, it calls to something ancient. She met his gaze, the weight of it pulling at her, stirring the hollow within to life. For the first time, the void didn't ache like loss, but hummed with possibility. A destiny not of fangs and fury, but of something softer, fiercer. Yet doubt clawed at her edges. The hunters could follow, and what king would harbour a banished soul? "Why help me?" she asked, voice barely above the wind's howl. "What do you see that they couldn't?" He reached out then, his fingers grazing the edge of her brand, light as a breath. The touch ignited it, not pain, but a cascade of warmth that bloomed through her veins, visions flickering at the periphery, golden eyes in the dark, a pack united not by blood, but by hidden lights. "I see a queen in exile," he said simply, his breath warm against the chill night. "And in your glow, the wild's redemption." But as they entered the hall, a shadow stirred in the rafters, a scout's silhouette, eyes gleaming with malice. Whispers of rival packs had reached even here, drawn by the threshold's ripple. Elara's heart stuttered. Safety was an illusion, her light a lure. Yet in Kale's steady presence, the darkness felt less like a cage and more like a forge, tempering her into something unbreakable. The sea roared below, a symphony of chaos and calm, mirroring the storm awakening within her. The grand hall swallowed them like the maw of some ancient beast, its vaulted ceiling lost in a tangle of cobwebs and shadowed beams that creaked under the weight of forgotten years. Torchlight danced erratically across walls, etched with murals of snarling wolves and radiant figures locked in eternal chase, their forms blurring where paint had flaked away like shed skin. The air hung thick with the smoke of incense, bitter myrrh and sweet sage, mingling with the salty brine that seeped through cracks in the stone, a reminder that the sea below hungered for all things fragile. Elara's footsteps echoed softly, each one a hesitant claim on this unfamiliar ground, her bare soles chilled by the flagstones that gleamed slick with sea mist. Kyle moved ahead, his silhouette cutting through the gloom like a blade forged from night itself, guiding her toward a massive hearth where embers glowed like dying stars. He knelt, adding twisted branches to the fire, and flames leapt to life with a hungry crackle, casting his face in warm, flickering gold. Scars traced his jaw and arms, silvered lines that told tales of claws and betrayals. Yet his movements held a gentleness that belied his power, a tenderness reserved for the broken things of the world. Elara hovered at the edge, arms wrapped around herself, the brand on her collarbone a dull throb now, as if sated by his nearness. "Sit," he said, voice low and steady, gesturing to a fur-draped bench carved from driftwood, its surface worn smooth by countless counsels. She obeyed, sinking into the pelts that smelled of earth and wild thyme, their softness a stark contrast to the thorns that still pricked her skin. The warmth seeped into her limbs, easing the ache of her flight, but it couldn't touch the knot of doubt twisting in her gut. Who was this king to offer sanctuary? Legends painted him as a conqueror, unyielding as the tides. Yet here he was, pouring herbal tea from a dented kettle, steam rising in lazy curls that carried notes of chamomile and something sharper, like crushed nettles. She accepted the mug, its heat seeping through her palms, grounding her as she sipped. The liquid burned sweetly down her throat, chasing away the metallic taste of fear. "Your scouts," she murmured, eyes flicking to the rafters where that shadow had stirred moments before. "They watch us. This place. It's no haven." Kyle's golden gaze met hers over the rim of his own mug, unflinching. "The neutral grounds are a fragile truce, woven from old blood oaths. Rivals prowl the edges, packs hungry for my throne or yours, once they learn of it." He set his drink aside, leaning forward, elbows on knees, the firelight etching hollows beneath his eyes. "But shadows fear the light more than I do. Yours especially." Elara's breath hitched, the warmth in her chest stirring again, faint but insistent, like a heartbeat awakening from slumber. She traced the brand's raised edges with a fingertip, the skin sensitive, alive. It's their mark of emptiness, a curse to keep me adrift. Yet even as she spoke, a soft luminescence flickered beneath her touch, pale as moonlight on water, illuminating the veins in her hand like threads of silver. She gasped, pulling back, but Kyle's hand caught her wrist, firm, yet not confining, holding her steady. "Look," he urged, his thumb brushing the pulse point where her skin thrummed. The glow intensified, not blinding, but enveloping, casting their faces in an ethereal haze that made the hall feel vast and intimate all at once. Visions teased at her edges, not memories, but fragments of something deeper, a vast inner landscape of starlit meadows and whispering winds, where a wolf's silhouette paced not with fury, but with quiet luminescence. Her soulless void wasn't barren. It was a cradle for this light, nurtured in silence while the pack's howls drowned it out. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and unbidden, spilling over as the glow faded, leaving her breathless. "How?" she whispered, voice fracturing like thin ice. "All my life I've felt nothing. The moon calls to them, shifts their bones, binds their souls. I was the outlier, the flaw they burned away." Kyle released her wrist slowly, his touch lingering like an echo, warm against the cooling air. He rose, pacing to a narrow window slit where the sea's roar filtered in, a ceaseless symphony of foam and fury. The moon goddess doesn't gift uniformly. Some souls burn with the wild's rage, claws and conquest. Others hold the quiet fire, the glow that mends what fury breaks. Your pack fears what they can't control, what defies their rituals. He turned, his expression a storm of resolve and regret, shadows playing across the hard lines of his face. "I was like them once, forged in endless wars, blind to the lights that could unite us, until a seer showed me the veil, how the soulless aren't empty, but unseen saviors." The word hung between them, heavy as the incense smoke curling toward the beams. Savior. Elara's heart clenched, a mix of longing and terror blooming in her chest. She had dreamed of belonging, of a place where her silence wasn't scorned, but in his eyes she saw more, a destiny that terrified her. Love flickered there, impossible and raw like lightning over the waves, his steady gaze promising protection, yet demanding she embrace the power that could shatter her fragile world. A sudden clamor shattered the moment, boots thudding against stone, voices rising in sharp challenge from the hall's entrance. The scout from the rafters dropped down, landing with feline grace, his furred cloak askew, eyes wide with alarm. "My king," he panted, bow slung across his back. "Intruders, Thorn's hunters. They've breached the threshold, trailing her scent. And worse, emissaries from the shadow pack slinking in the fog below. They whisper of a soulless prize to claim." Kyle's face hardened, the tenderness vanishing like mist under sun, replaced by the Alpha's unyielding edge. He stood, drawing a blade from his belt that hummed with embedded runes, its edge glinting like captured moonlight. "Bar the outer gates. Rouse the guards." To Elara, his voice softened fractionally, laced with urgency. "Stay here. Your light. They'll sense it, crave it to twist into their weapons." But as he moved toward the door, the hall trembled, a low growl rumbling from the earth itself, the sea's roar amplifying into a thunderous clash. Elara rose, her brand igniting once more, unbidden, flooding her veins with that inner blaze. She couldn't hide, not anymore. The glow wrapped her like armor, soft yet unyielding, and she stepped forward, hand outstretched. "No," she said, voice steady for the first time, echoing with newfound strength. "If this is my destiny, I face it with you." Kyle paused, turning to her, awe flickering in his golden depths amid the rising chaos. The intruder's howls pierced the night, claws scraping stone as they closed in, but in that shared glance, the darkness yielded, a fragile hope forged in light and shadow. The storm within her raged, no longer a whisper, but a force ready to illuminate the wilds or consume them whole. Outside, the waves crashed higher, mirroring the tide of fate pulling them under together. The clash of steel rang through the hall like the first crack of thunder, shattering the fragile hush as the intruders surged past the barred doors. Splinters flew from the ancient wood, embedding in the tapestries like jagged memories, and the air thickened with the acrid bite of sweat and fury. Thorn led the charge, his scarred form twisting mid-leap from wolf to man, claws scraping furrows into the flagstones that sent sparks dancing into the hearth's flames. Behind him, his two hunters flanked like shadows given teeth, their eyes locked on Elara with a hunger that bordered on madness, not for her blood, but for the light she could no longer contain. Kyle met them head-on, his blade a silver arc that sang through the gloom, lashing against Thorn's extended talons with a force that reverberated up Elara's spine. The Alpha King's movements were a storm incarnate, precise and unrelenting, his golden eyes flashing with the raw power of the wilds he commanded. He drove Thorn back against a pillar, the stone groaning under the impact, dust sifting down like ash from a funeral pyre. "You tread on neutral ground," Kyle growled, voice laced with gravel and command. "And for what? A ghost you branded empty." Thorn snarled, blood trickling from a gash on his shoulder, staining his fur-matted tunic crimson. "She's a blight, King. Her emptiness mocks the moon's gifts. We'll drag her back, or end her here." His companions lunged, one fainting low toward Kyle's legs, while the other circled toward Elara. Fangs bared in a rictus grin that reeked of rotting meat and spite. Elara's heart hammered, a wild drum echoing the sea's relentless pounding below. But she didn't flee. The glow within her surged, unbidden and fierce, blooming from her brand like roots breaking stone. It wrapped her skin in a veil of soft luminescence, not the harsh blaze of a wolf's shift, but a quiet radiance that pushed back the encroaching shadows. The air hummed around her, charged with the scent of ozone and wildflowers crushed underfoot, and for the first time she felt the void, not as absence, but as a vessel overflowing. Her hands trembled, but she raised them, palms out, as the hunter closed in, his form blurring at the edges where her light touched him, like ink dissolving in water. "Stay back," she whispered, the words carrying an unexpected weight, rippling outward in waves that made the intruder's steps falter. He howled, a sound twisted with pain and confusion, his claws retracting involuntarily, as if burned by an unseen flame. Elara gasped, the effort pulling at her core like threads unraveling from her soul, but the glow held, illuminating the murals on the walls. Wolves bowing to luminous figures, their forms entwined in a dance of light and shadow. From the periphery, more figures melted into the fray. The Shadowpack's emissaries, sleek and insidious, their pelts dappled like oil on water, eyes gleaming with opportunistic malice. They slunk through a side arch, drawn by the threshold's echo and the promise of chaos. Their leader, a lithe female with silver-streaked fur, hissing commands in a tongue like slithering serpents. "The Soulless glows," she murmured, voice silk over steel. "A prize to bind or break. Claim it for the shadows." Kyle roared, disengaging from Thorn to intercept the newcomers, his blade whirling in a deadly blur that felled one emissary with a spray of dark blood that splattered the floor, warm and viscous against Elara's bare feet. The hall devolved into a maelstrom, bodies twisting, grunts and snarls blending with the crackle of the hearth and the distant crash of waves. Elara backed toward the hearth, her light flaring brighter with each pulse of fear and resolve, casting elongated shadows that writhed like living entities. One of Thorn's hunters broke through, lunging at her with claws extended, but her glow erupted in a burst, slamming into him like a gentle gale. He crumpled, eyes wide with bewilderment, his form flickering as if the light unraveled his very essence, forcing him to shift back to human, gasping and broken. Yet the cost clawed at her. Each flare drained something vital, a hollow ache spreading through her chest like frost on glass, threatening to crack the warmth she'd only just discovered. Tears stung her eyes, blurring the chaos, and doubt whispered, was this power a gift or a curse, destined to consume her as the pack's judgment nearly had? She glimpsed Kyle then, locked in combat with the silver-streaked leader, his arm scored by her talons, blood welling in rivulets that traced the scars of old wounds. Their eyes met across the fray, his golden gaze fierce with pride, and something deeper, a tether pulling her forward. "Elara!" he bellowed, voice cutting through the din like a clarion. "Your light. Wield it. It's yours, not theirs to fear." Emboldened, she stepped into the melee, the glow coiling around her like living mist, tendrils reaching out to ensnare the remaining intruders. Thorn charged again, his face a mask of rage, but as he neared, her light pierced him, not destroying, but revealing. Visions flooded her mind, his own buried doubts, the pack's rituals masking their fractures, the moon goddess's threads binding all souls in a web of light and shadow. He staggered, clutching his head, a guttural cry escaping as the glow forced him to confront the emptiness he projected onto her. What are you?" he rasped, collapsing to his knees, the fight leeching from his limbs. The Shadow Pack's leader hissed, retreating with her surviving kin, melting into the fog-shrouded exits like smoke, their whispers trailing promises of vengeance. The hall fell into ragged silence, broken only by labored breaths and the hearth's dying sputter. Kyle sheathed his blade, striding to Elara's side, his hand finding her shoulder, steady, anchoring as her glow dimmed to a faint ember, leaving her swaying on exhaustion's edge. Blood streaked his face, mingling with sweat, but his touch was gentle, tracing the brand now cool and quiescent against her skin. "You faced the storm," he murmured, voice roughened by battle, pulling her against him. The scent of pine and blood enveloped her, a balm against the lingering tremors, and in it you shone, not as a weapon but as the heart the wilds need. Yet even in victory shadows lingered. Scouts reported the intruders' retreat, but not without cost. Wounds that would fester, alliances that might shatter under the weight of what they'd witnessed. Elara leaned into him. The seas roar a lullaby now, whispering of trials yet to come. Her light had saved them, but it had also marked her, a beacon drawing darker forces from the fractured realms. In his arms, amid the ruin and the quiet, she felt the stirrings of destiny, not as a solitary flame, but one kindled by another, fragile and fierce against the encroaching night. The waves below surged higher, carrying the echo of howls on the wind, a prelude to the greater tempests brewing in the soul-bound wilds. The embers in the hearth hissed like dying breaths, their glow casting long, wavering shadows across the blood-streaked flagstones. Elara's limbs felt leaden, the aftershock of her light surge rippling through her like echoes of thunder fading into silence. She slumped against Kyle, the rough weave of his tunic pressing into her cheek, absorbing the salt of her sweat and the faint coppery tang of spilled blood that permeated the air. His arm encircled her waist, a steady anchor amid the ruin, his heartbeat a deep, rhythmic pulse against her side, wild yet reassuring, like the sea's eternal cadence below the cliffs. The hall lay in disarray, overturned benches splintered like broken bones, tapestries torn and fluttering in the draught that seeped through the fractured doors, carrying the chill bite of fog rolling in from the waves. Thorn and his hunters had been bound by Kael's guards, their forms slumped in the corners, breaths ragged, and eyes averted from the faint luminescence still clinging to Elara's skin, like dew on midnight petals. The Shadow Pack's emissaries had vanished into the mist, but their scent lingered, oily and insidious, a promise of pursuits yet to unfold. Scouts murmured reports in low tones, their voices weaving through the quiet like threads of unease. Reinforcements gathering on the borders, whispers of the soulless glow spreading like wildfire through the fractured packs. Kyle eased her down onto the fur-draped bench, his hands lingering on her shoulders, thumbs tracing gentle circles that chased away the chill seeping into her bones. "Rest," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her, warm as the hearth's fading warmth. But sleep was a distant shore. Her mind churned with the visions her light had unearthed, not just in Thorn, but in herself. The void she'd carried like a shroud wasn't emptiness, but a mirror reflecting the pack's hidden fractures, fears masked as rituals, strengths buried under the weight of tradition. And in that reflection, she saw Kael too, his golden eyes holding scars deeper than those on his skin, a king who ruled with iron will but yearned for the unity his wars had shattered. She reached up, fingers brushing the gash on his forearm where the silver-streaked leader's claws had raked deep. Blood welled fresh under her touch, warm and slick, but as her skin met his, a spark jumped between them. Not pain, but a shared pulse, her glow flickering to life in response. It wove into his wound like silken threads, the edges knitting slowly, the air humming with the faint scent of healing herbs and ozone. Kyle inhaled sharply, his gaze locking onto hers, molten gold swirling with wonder and something raw, a hunger tempered by restraint. "Your light. It mends," he whispered, awe threading his words like vines through stone. "Not just the body, but the soul's frayed edges." Elara pulled back, the effort draining her further, leaving a hollow ache in her chest that echoed the sea's mournful roar. "I don't understand it," she admitted, voice fracturing like thin ice underfoot. "All my life I was the shadow they feared, the one without the moon's call, without the shift that binds them. Now this. It's like waking from a dream I never knew I was in." Tears traced hot paths down her cheeks, mingling with the grime of battle, and she wiped them away with a trembling hand, tasting salt and regret. The brand on her collarbone throbbed dully, no longer a mark of exile, but a key, unlocking doors she'd long believed sealed. Kyle knelt before her, his massive frame folding with a grace that belied his power, taking her hands in his. Calluses rough from blade and claw contrasted her softer palms, yet they fit together as if forged in the same fire. "The old tales speak of the glow-born," he said, his breath warm against her knuckles, stirring the fine hairs on her skin. "Souls touched by the moon goddess's quieter grace. Not the wild fury of the packs, but the light that reveals truths hidden in darkness. They were revered once, before fear twisted the lore into curses. You are no soulless wanderer, Elara. You are the promise they banished." His words wrapped around her heart like the fog outside, soft yet insistent, stirring a longing she'd buried deep, for belonging, for a love that saw beyond the void. In his eyes she glimpsed impossible futures, hands entwined under starlit skies, packs united not by blood, but by the glow that bridged their divides. But doubt clawed at the edges, sharp as thorns, the hunter's pursuit, the shadow pack's envy, the weight of a destiny that demanded sacrifice. "And if they come again?" she asked, voice barely above the wind's whisper through the cracks. "If my light draws more than it repels, I can't lose. This." Her gaze dropped to their joined hands, the faint luminescence pulsing between their fingers like a shared heartbeat. Kyle lifted her chin gently, his touch igniting sparks that danced along her nerves. "Then we face it together," he vowed, his voice steel wrapped in velvet. "I've forged empires from ashes, but you've shown me the light to rebuild them whole. Stay with me, not as exile, but as equal. Let the wilds see what I see, a queen rising from the mist." The vulnerability in his confession hung between them, raw and electric, the air thickening with unspoken desires, the brush of his lips against her forehead, a promise of tenderness amid the storm. Elara leaned into him, her body yielding to the exhaustion, but her spirit alight with fragile hope. Outside, the fog deepened, carrying distant howls that twisted like warnings on the wind, and the sea surged against the cliffs with renewed fury, foam cresting like white fangs under the fractured moon. Yet as dawn's first grey tendrils pierced the horizon, a scout burst through the doors, face pale and etched with urgency. "My king, riders from the Eldridge borders. The high priest leads them, demanding the Soulless one's return. They bring silver chains forged with shadow magic to bind her light forever." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the quiet hall, shattering the fragile peace. Kyle rose, pulling Elara with him, his grip unyielding. Her glow flared instinctively, casting the scout's fear in sharp relief, illuminating the path ahead, not to flight, but to confrontation. The brand burned with purpose now, a scar transformed into emblem, and in Kyle's steady gaze she found the strength to embrace it. The wilds called not with howls of rage, but with the whisper of destiny unfolding, pulling them toward a climax where light and shadow would collide, and from the ashes a new era might bloom or burn. The waves below thundered approval, their rhythm syncing with her quickening pulse, as the first light of morning bled across the ruins, heralding trials that would test the bonds of heart and soul. The first light of dawn clawed its way over the horizon, a pale sliver bleeding into the fog-shrouded ruins like diluted blood on weathered stone. Elara stood at the hall's threshold, the chill wind whipping her tattered cloak against her legs, carrying the sharp tang of salt and impending rain from the sea below. Her brand pulsed with a steady rhythm now, no longer a raw wound, but a living ember, its warmth threading through her veins like roots seeking soil. Kale's presence beside her was a bulwark, his broad frame silhouetted against the greying sky, blade already drawn and humming with restrained fury. The scout's words echoed in her mind. Silver chains, shadow magic, the high priest's unyielding decree, a noose tightening around the fragile hope they'd kindled in the night. The riders crested the cliffside path in a thunder of hooves, their forms materializing from the mist like spectres summoned from the deep. At their fore rode the high priest, Elias, his robes billowing like raven wings, the silver sigils embroidered on them glinting with malevolent intent. Flanking him were enforcers from the Eldridge pack, their eyes hollow with fanatic zeal, chains dangling from their saddles, forged links that twisted unnaturally, whispering with the dark hum of stolen moon essence. Thorns-bound hunters trailed behind, dragged on leashes like broken hounds, their gazes averted in shame or defeat. The air thickened with their approach, the ground trembling under the weight of hooves that scarred the earth, kicking up clods of mud that splattered like accusations. Elara's breath caught, the sea's roar amplifying into a cacophony that mirrored the storm in her chest. Memories surged unbidden. Elias's chance at her banishment, the silver's searing kiss, the pack's chorus of rejection that had hollowed her soul. "They come to erase me," she murmured, her voice barely threading above the wind. Fingers clenching at her sides until nails bit into palms, drawing pinpricks of blood that welled warm and metallic. Kyle's hand found hers, squeezing with a grip that grounded her, his golden eyes fierce as forged sunlight. "They come to fear what they can't chain," he replied, his timbre low and resonant, vibrating through her like the earth's own pulse. "Stand with me, Elara. Your light is the dawn they dread." Yet even in his resolve, she sensed the undercurrent of sacrifice, the weight of a king who had lost realms to such zealots before, the scars on his soul deeper than those on his flesh. The riders halted at the keep's outer barricade, Elias dismounting with a fluid grace that belied his age. His staff, topped with a crystal veined in shadow, thudding against the stone like a judge's gavel. "Alpha King!" he intoned, voice carrying the oily smoothness of ritual incantations. "The Eldridge pack claims its due. The soulless abomination has breached sacred bounds, her taint spreading like rot. Deliver her, or face the moon's wrath through our blades." Kyle stepped forward, his stance unyielding as the cliffs, the wind tugging at his cloak to reveal the runes etched into his armor, glowing faintly in solidarity with Elara's inner blaze. "Your moon's wrath is a fable for the fearful," he snarled, the words laced with the growl of his beast. "She is no abomination, but the glowborn, the light your rituals blinded you to. Return to your fractured dens, priest, or these grounds will drink your blood as neutral truce." Elias's laugh slithered through the air, cold and serpentine, as he raised his staff. The chains uncoiled from the enforcer's hands like living serpents, slithering forward with a hiss that chilled Elara's skin, their links pulsing with inky voids that hungered for her essence. "Light, we see only the void she embodies. Bind her and purge the heresy." The enforcers charged, chains whipping through the fog, their tips seeking her like guided fangs. The battle erupted in a whirlwind of violence and shadow. Kyle met the first wave, his blade cleaving through an enforcer's guard, the clash of metal ringing like shattered bells over the waves. Blood sprayed, hot and coppery, arcing through the dawnlight to stain the stone. Elara dodged a chain's lash, its shadow grazing her arm and sending icy tendrils snaking into her veins, numbing her limbs with a frost that clawed at her core. Pain bloomed, sharp as thorns, but her glow ignited in response, a radiant barrier that shattered the chain's advance, fragments scattering like brittle ice. She pushed forward, the light coiling from her brand in luminous tendrils, weaving through the fray to ensnare the enforcers. One fell, his form convulsing as visions assailed him. The pack's hypocrisies laid bare, rituals born of fear rather than faith. But Elias countered, his staff channeling a surge of shadow that slammed into her glow, the collision birthing a vortex of clashing energies, light fracturing against darkness, the air crackling with ozone and the scent of scorched earth. Elara staggered, the impact ripping through her like glass shards, tearing at the threads of her newfound power. Her vision blurred, the world tilting as the priest advanced, chains reforming in his grasp. "You can't hide it forever," Elias hissed, his eyes gleaming with fanatic glee, staff raised for the final bind. The void claims its own. The chains lunged, wrapping her wrists in frigid embrace, their magic siphoning her light, draining it in pulsing waves that left her gasping, the warmth in her chest flickering like a candle in gale. Agony seared her, deeper than the brand's fire, stripping layers of her essence until the hollow returned. Vast and echoing, she collapsed to her knees, mud soaking through her knees, tears carving paths through the grime on her face. In that moment of loss, the glow dimmed to near extinction, and with it, the illusion shattered. She wasn't whole without sacrifice, her light born from the very void they'd cursed. Kyle roared, breaking through the melee to sever the chains with a desperate swing, his blade shattering links that dissolved into smoke. He pulled her to him, cradling her against his chest as Elias recoiled, the priest's staff cracking under the strain of backlash. The remaining enforcers faltered, shadows retreating from the dawn's insistent creep, their resolve crumbling as Elara's fading light revealed their leader's own buried doubts, a priest haunted by visions of a goddess who favored the quiet over the roar. Elias fled then, mounting his steed with a curse that dissolved into the wind, his riders scattering like leaves in storm. The keep fell silent, save for the sea's triumphant crash and the ragged symphony of breaths. Elara trembled in Kyle's arms, the drain leaving her weakened, a scar of shadow etched across her brand, dark veins marbling the skin, a permanent reminder of the cost. Yet in the depletion, clarity bloomed. She had lost the untested blaze, but gained the tempered flame, her true self forged in the crucible of near extinction. As the sun crested fully, gilding the ruins in golden hues, Gale pressed his forehead to hers, his breath mingling with hers in shared exhaustion and quiet joy. "You endured," he whispered, voice rough with emotion, fingers tracing the new scar with reverence. "And in losing the veil, you revealed the queen within." Their eyes met, a gaze heavy with unspoken vows, love born of trials, a bond that transcended pack and crown. Elara rose unsteadily, the sea wind carrying the faint howls of distant packs, now laced with uncertainty rather than pursuit. The wilds stirred, whispers of the glowborn spreading like dawn's light, promising a renascimento where Soulless no longer meant forsaken. In that symbolic scar, etched like a crescent moon on her skin, she found redemption, not in perfection, but in the beauty of her broken glow, illuminating a path for the fractured realms to heal. The waves below softened to a lullaby, heralding an era where light and shadow danced as one, under the watchful eye of a king who had seen her true radiance from the start.